Hello everyone. This is yet another episode of Career Talks by Welcome Solutions. And in these meetings, we talk with professionals with fascinating career paths who are willing to share their life hacks with us. And today I have great pleasure to talk to Dr. Krzysztof Choromański, who is a research scientist at Google Brain Robotics in New York and an adjunct assistant professor at Columbia University. Prior to joining Google, he completed his PhD at Columbia University, working on structural graph theory. His interests include structural and random graph theory, robotics and reinforcement learning, quasi Monte Carlo methods for machine learning, Riemannian optimization, and most recently, attention-based architectures for sequential data with applications in robotics, bioinformatics, and vision. Thank you so much, Krzysztof, for attending our episode today and for accepting our invitation. Great to have you. Thank you so much for finding time in your packed schedule to be with us today. And I'm very curious about how your life story and how your career story panned out so far, and what were the bottlenecks and what were the important decisions you had to make in the process. And it all sounds very exciting. So I'm glad to know more about your story from the very beginning.
Yeah, good morning, and it's a great pleasure to to be here. Yeah, I mean, I would say that in terms of well, my story, my research story, well, it really all started, I would say, like with well, IBM research internship that I had well, some number of years ago. It was in 2008, so quite some number of years ago. But I was a student at the University of Warsaw, computer science and mathematics department. And me and my friends got the chance to work as interns at IBM in New York. And that was actually the first time I saw New York. I fell in love with New York. And I also started thinking very seriously about applying for PhD at universities in the United States, not necessarily just like in New York, but obviously I had in the back of my head that, well, there are great universities in New York, Columbia University, NYU. So that was like one of the, I would say, like turning points in my career. I applied. I got admitted to a couple of universities, in particular NYU and Columbia University. And actually, one of my first dilemma was which one to choose. And well, the funny anecdote that I can say that well, not that many people know about is that when I was admitted, like in particular to NYU at Columbia, well, I was invited to see the campus. So I traveled to New York, and on my way back to Poland, I actually had the seat like next to a student at NYU, and we started like some like random conversation. And I explained that, well, I'm just coming back from the United States, that I will start PhD. And it was kind of like funny because, well, she told me that, so I told her that I still like thinking about which university to choose. And she said, I remember it, like you shouldn't even think for a moment, like Columbia University, it's Ivy League. This is like the best choice you can make. It was kind of funny because she was actually from NYU. I mean, both like universities really great. So I don't want to say that I listened to her. I actually, I mean, was kind of like convinced at some point that Columbia like will be, well, a better choice, even though, as I said, it's hard to say. I'm sure like NYU like would be also like great. But that was like interesting story. And then like the PhD started, and I had the pleasure to work with Professor Maria Szurnowski on graph theory. I met her actually even before I started PhD during my summer internship at IBM. And I would say it was like really a great time. I would say like the PhD was too short. So I completed like in 4 years. And my advisor like thought that like I don't need like more time. But actually I was like a little upset because I really enjoyed my time like as a PhD student. maybe not so much like in terms of like financial stuff, but really like living in New York, and that was just a really great time, like when I could focus completely on research, thinking about proving theorems, stuff. It was really a really good time, and obviously enjoying life in New York outside of the research scope too. So that's kind of like that's like really 4 like great years like in my life. And well, I was working on what's called the Erdos-Hajnal Conjecture, which is it's still actually opened. We managed to prove a couple of interesting results, but the conjecture is still wide open. And frankly speaking, I still work on it, like as a kind of like as my I would say like side job. I think that would be like great like to prove or disprove it. But that was like really great time, and then I would say like the next important point, like it's really the decision like to make like which path to choose after completing my PhD.
In Welcome Solutions, we help highly educated professionals with navigating towards their dream careers. We offer intensive career rotation courses combining self-discovery with practical information about the job market. We also work on our own educational materials such as books and self-navigation manuals. Our new tool, the Odyssey test, will help you discover what your natural way of creating value in the job market is and which working environment will fit you best. If you'd like to stay in touch with us and receive monthly updates, please subscribe to the newsletter.
Should it be academia, just continue like working on graph theory, and there are a couple of options, like they're like looking like for a postdoc. I was actually looking like for postdoc. I got some offers. The other option was actually Google. So the way it started is I got internship at Google on my last year of my PhD studies. And again, like very interesting, like funny story, because I actually got the call from Google, from the recruiters, and just turns out that like one of my colleagues from the University of Warsaw recommended me. So that's kind of like how I got the call, and yeah, I got well admitted to this like internship. Went to San Francisco for a couple of months. Actually, I was working in Mountain View, but living in San Francisco. And that was actually, I think, the first time when I actually saw the West Coast. And so it was like a very good time for sure. And really, like, I enjoyed like working there. I was actually working on graph theory too, but it was kind of like just like more applied. And then, as I said, it was like a big decision to make, like whether to go, just continue academia path or think about industry, joining Google, for instance. And I decided that Google like will be well, the best option. I think I kind of like felt that this time, like when machine learning like will be very big, is coming. And that time it was like I think around 2012. People were very excited about what ML can do, but it wasn't like what's happening right now. It was still kind of like a little bit like a pre-revolution. So you could kind of sense it in the air that it would be like a very big field. And I think I kind of like understood it like early on, that me going into machine learning, I'd be still like able to use all my skills that I'm also like graph theory, but there are lots of other opportunities that open, and it's kind of like just a very wide area when I can use like a bunch of skills. And it just turns out that that was exactly what happened. So within like, a few years, I actually learned machine learning, because my PhD wasn't in machine learning. I learned it at Google with really like amazing colleagues that I had a pleasure, and I have a pleasure to work with. And this is where I am right now at Google Brain Robotics team. So I really enjoy it a lot. Working with robots is something that, well, I wouldn't like expect like a couple of years ago, and definitely not when I joined Google. but it's really fun. I mean, it's making all this like theorems, like all this like mathematics work really in practice. I mean, when you see like that the robot is doing what it's supposed to do, that the algorithm works, it's just a great satisfaction. But I keep well links like with Columbia University. As I said, I had really amazing time there. So as you mentioned, I'm an adjunct assistant professor at Columbia. I really enjoy like working with students. You know, I don't consider myself like as a kind of like, I mean, professor who kind of like, I mean, completed like PhD like years ago. Like for me, like, you know, it's really, I mean, working with students, with young people, it's something that I enjoy a lot. And they have like very fresh like point of view. I mean, because they don't know that certain things are impossible, that they are hard. And that's the right attitude in life. And that's why, you know, I keep doing this. So I had, you know, pleasure to work with so many different people. Google is also like happy like with me being well involved like in all this like efforts at Columbia University. So that's kind of like in a nutshell, you know, my story since 2008, where I went for internship at IBM. That really changed my life in many different ways.
Fantastic. Yeah, I have so many questions now. So my first question would be about like, because since I graduated from the same university, we were both students of University of Warsaw, and I'm still in touch with many of my peer former students, and I sometimes wonder how does it happen that some of the smartest people among the pool of students that we were studying with never even graduated from masters, not mentioning about PhDs, not mentioning about building careers, and some of the people landed at Google Robotics or Columbia University and are building great careers right now. So, what do you think made you excel, and what do you think is the secret why you're going forward so quickly in your career as compared to, let's say, the general population, other people who are, let's say, are also smart, like in terms of their capability to understand mathematics, yet they cannot really work out the career like you do?
Yeah, I think there are lots of like different factors here. I mean, one is simply like, you know, the priorities like that you have in your life, and you know, people just choose different paths. And I will give an example. Like one of my friends from the times of Polish mathematical Olympiads, he was like extremely talented mathematician. He actually qualified to international mathematical Olympiad, like the Polish team. And I had the pleasure like to, well, I spent time with him like when we were all preparing to international competition in Polish camp in Zwardoń. And I don't want to mention like the name, it's not that relevant, but the point is that I remember he actually won like, I think like a silver medal at IMO, if I remember well. And I know that at some point he just kind of quitted mathematics. I think he was always like also like very good like in languages. And I think like I don't know whether he learned Chinese or Japanese, but he went like to Asia, and you know, he kind of like quitted mathematics like very abruptly. And you know, these are the decisions that people make because, as I said, right, like mathematics, like research is not everything. There are like other like priorities people have, and like sometimes they just decide they want to do something very different. The other thing is that even if you kind of like want to continue this kind of like research path, like for instance, like the PhD life is kind of like different than what you have like in competitions. Like the competition is like you have a couple of problems that are, you know, they are solvable. I mean, because otherwise you wouldn't have them like in the competition, a couple of hours to solve them. When you work on the PhD problem, I mean, the problem for your PhD thesis, sometimes you even don't know whether, I mean, how hard, like how feasible it is, like to solve it. And that's like additional risk, and you need to work on it like not for 5 hours. You need to work for it on it like for well, a couple of years usually. And some people simply don't have like patience. It's just a different like style that they have. It's kind of like more like focusing like on something like you can really solve like quicker, more problems than a single problem that you need to wait like for a long time. And the best example, I think, I was watching interview with well, great like British American physicist Freeman Dyson, who actually said that that was his problem like with the PhD system, that he cannot really work for like a long time like on one problem. That, you know, if something doesn't work, he wants to jump to the other problem. But like kind of like when you are like in this like PhD format, then you want to spend more time like on one problem. You can jump, but you shouldn't jump like every couple of days. So, you know, these are like all these like factors, right? Like why some people like kind of don't even like try like to go for PhD, just like different style. And you know, as I said, like I met so many like amazing people in my life, like with amazing stories, and doing like different things that you know, I'm like the last person to say that, you know, there is like one particular template that one should follow. At the very end, it's what makes you happy, right? I mean, you go like to Asia, right? Like you learn like Chinese or Japanese, and you have really fun, like learning the culture. Go for it, right? Like you want like to do great research, go for it too. In my case, I think like from like very early childhood, I had imprinted in my brain like all the stories of this like Nobel Prize winners, and like you know, this like amazing discoveries that they made, and I wanted like to you know, do something that well, others like will remember me for. And kind of that was me driving me to kind of like do this research, even though there were lots of obstacles, and this wasn't the case that everything was smooth and easy. But as I said, right, like people have just like very different driving forces like behind them, and so many like different like factors like play a role here that no, that's how, right, like we have like all these like different stories at the end. But yeah, I know like amazing mathematicians, amazing researchers, lots of my colleagues like from competition times that ended up in many different places, and I'm in touch with them, and I know they enjoy their time, and you know, that's the most important thing. Like, make smart decisions in your life that make you happy. So that's what I can say about this.
Okay. Well, that's a very humble way of thinking of yourself, I think, because it's clear that you developed a great career. And well, I mean, I'm curious about your current job, of course, because for many PhD graduates, and not only, to a lot of people, Google, first of all, Google is a great brand, and Google is at the frontier of IT industry in many different aspects. And I'm sure that Google Brain Robotics is actually at the frontier of robotics, and also partially neuroscience as well. And I'm curious what if you can disclose anything, like any of the projects that you're working on, or that Google Brain Robotics is working on at the moment. I'm sure that this is one area of interest in terms of potential future career paths for many graduates of computer science and also neuroscience today. So I would like to know a little bit more about what you're working on.
Yeah, so definitely there is, yeah, I mean, there's obviously some like confidential like efforts, but there are lots of like things that are like publicly available, and this stuff like I can talk about. I mean, it's really, you know, I think that the main theme is giving the machine learning revolution, right? Like how we can adapt like those techniques like into robotics. That's the big theme. The standard like I would say like pre-ML robotics was mostly like control theory, and in this way somehow limited. I mean, you can do lots of like things, but now like with ML, there are like new opportunities. So the very big team is whatever we could do like with ML in the standard non-RL setting, like how we can translate this success into reinforcement learning / robotics. And given that we have expertise in ML, and the question is how we can leverage like those skills. So we have real robots in the company, and that makes like a big difference, like when we work on stuff, because it's not like relying like just like on the simulator. At the very end, you want to deploy it on the real hardware, and actually at the very end, the real problem starts when you want to deploy stuff on the real hardware, like stuff that works in the simulator no longer works that well like on the real robot. In terms of like really projects and the research scope, it's very broad. I mean, there is like very exciting research on locomotion. There is very exciting research on manipulation, like and also general robotics, general reinforcement learning, like making advances like in ML algorithms like behind them. I myself am very interested in adapting like very recent techniques, leveraging attention transformers pipelines in reinforcement learning and robotics. So this is like in particular the class of methods of algorithms that we simply call performers, like a new class of transformers that me and my colleagues developed in order to make regular attention algorithms more scalable to much longer sequences, to much high dimensional data, and applying it in particular in reinforcement learning, even though in robotics, even though this is probably not the most standard, not the most canonical application of those methods. So this is kind of like in a nutshell, what we are working on. I would say that the most important part is robotics right now is really a very broad field that can use techniques from many different branches of mathematics / applied mathematics. So there's control theory, there is machine learning. When we talk about vision, right, there is like an amazing revolution in using machine learning for vision. Now, how this can be adapted in robotics, right? Like, there's a huge opportunity there. And of course, it's there are many companies that see that, right? Like, I mean, Google is doing amazing stuff, and other companies and academic centers, they understand that the potential of those methods. So it's a very exciting time for all of us working on that stuff, because again, I think people understand that it's just like a matter of time, like to have like this new robotics revolution with those techniques that turn out to be very useful and more kind of like standard pre-robotic applications.
Right. Actually, I would like to ask just one more question about this transformers, since this is a new term for me. So could you explain us very shortly what this is?
Yeah, so transformers is a new class of machine learning architectures that was proposed a couple of years ago. It's actually like a pretty recent method, I think like 2-3 years ago, actually by researchers from Google. Some of them, I think, like Google Brain, so my colleagues like from my team. The idea is transformers are designed to process sequential data. So if you think about your data as a sequence of tokens. Now, what those tokens are, can be anything. Like, you can think about the more standard application text data. Different tokens will correspond to different words. Words are ordered, and there's some particular order of words. They have content. There are relationship between words. The other application would be images. where the tokens can correspond to patches or even individual pixels. And again, there is some ordering that you have. So the idea of transformers is to somehow encode this inductive priors modeling the relationship between different tokens in the sequence. So prior to transformers, the standard approach to sequential data were recurrent neural networks. So the idea is that there is like one hidden state that tries to encapsulate the entire sequence. But the problem with this approach is that, well, this hidden state is pretty compact and it needs to encapsulate the entire history. The sequence can be very long. Think about text data or think about images, like when you have like millions of pixels. And because the hidden state is very compact, like it's also limited like in its expressivity. So the idea of transformers is to use the attention mechanism. So the attention mechanism is a structure for modeling, explicitly modeling the relationship between different tokens in the sequence. And this attention mechanism is actually combined like with more standard mechanisms that were used like previously in standard neural network architectures like multi-layer perceptron, MLP, but this is really the attention that is a game changer. So that's kind of like roughly speaking what transformers are. They try to explicitly model these relationships, and it actually helps like in order to get like better quality models. And transformers like took by storm machine learning, becoming new state of the art for processing text data. So really like, I mean, substantially outperforming RNNs. So actually LSTMs and RNNs are no really longer used like for this data. Instead, people use transformers. But surprisingly, they become very efficient in other domains, like while working like with images. People even start applying it in reinforcement learning and robotics that what I just mentioned. Speech is another setting like where transformers are used. And so this is like a very new set of techniques that somehow well apply a bunch of different methods, but really this attention module, attention block is a game changer. And attention itself like was known in machine learning for years. I mean, many years before transformers were proposed. But transformers were really the first architectures that utilized very efficiently this concept of the attention, where you explicitly model the relationship between different tokens, and turned out to be extremely successful, well, in the entire machine learning field. So people are very excited about it, and I would say that almost every day you see a couple of new papers on transformers, like different like transformers variants, and it's nice to see that because with those new methods we can do much more than with standard techniques.
And are transformers also perhaps used in any way by Google Translate? Because I was just observing how it massively improved in the last 2, 3, 5 years, like translating between, let's say, Polish and English. Now it's almost perfect text. Just a few years back, it was quite laughable, but now it's almost like indistinguishable from human text. And I'm quite amazed by that. So I was just curious if maybe transformers have some input there as well.
So yeah, one thing is in terms of like some confidential projects, I must be like a little enigmatic. Mm-hmm. But you know what I can say is that it's definitely, I mean, big companies such as Google understand like the potential of transformers, and especially in the context of processing sequential data.
Okay, all right. I'll look into that. Okay, super. Okay, so my next question for you would be, you know, since you very effectively balance on the edge of research in academia and also in industry, I have a bit like provocative question. Since you know how machine research in machine learning and reinforcement learning in particular is done, who do you think is currently the leader in reinforcement learning research? Is it Google or is it the rest of the world?
Well, I mean, I work at Google, and I definitely, my opinion, maybe not the most like objective like one by definition. I think lots of like companies do like really great research on reinforcement learning and robotics. And I think like, you know, we are definitely very humble like at Google, like into I mean, we understand like that. At the same time, you know, I think I can definitely say that the research that is done at Google on reinforcement learning and robotics is well, I mean, definitely the top like research. I think like we are like on the frontiers of modern reinforcement learning and robotics. This type of research is very specific because it requires a bunch of different things. I mean, of course, like I mean, researchers that are like experts like in the field, and you know, this type of this feature, right? Like is I mean, there are lots of like great researchers, like also like at academia. But the other important thing is well, resources, and I think like here, like in general, industry has an advantage over academia, like in terms of like having those resources. So you know, we can come up like with great algorithms, but in a field like robotics and reinforcement learning, you know, it's not just like about, you know, we have the algorithm, you prove the correctness, but you actually need to show that the stuff works. It's very practical in many different ways. It's more, we can think about like an applied mathematics, or kind of like, for me, I would say, you know, I think about it like a little bit like physics. I kind of like have very warm like feelings to physics. I myself like actually like was in Physics International Olympiad, like member of the Polish team. So, you know, our work on robotics and reinforcement learning, I think about it a little bit like a physicist, like where you need to come up like with a really nice theory, nice model. But at the very end, right, like you want to get like the Nobel Prize, the stuff like needs to be verified experimentally. So this is like very important. Like, and if the model, you know, is beautiful, mathematically elegant, but turns out not to work, nobody really cares about it. I mean, you can still write the paper, right, like about the beauty like of mathematics and stuff, but really what matters, right, like it's at the very end whether it reflects what nature is actually doing. And it's somehow like similar like in machine learning, is that, you know, you can come up like with amazing algorithm for learning like your policies of your robots. But at the very end, if it doesn't work like on the real hardware, then it's kind of like not really that exciting. So I think that you know, industry has a disadvantage over academia, that there are no these resources, compute resources that are needed in order to train those models, and it just takes time. And of course, like as I said, it's the case like of Google that we do have resources, and also the case like of other great companies that do have them and leverage them like effectively. And I think like academia understands that, like is that you know, the time like has changed a little bit. I mean, if you work like on abstract mathematics, you don't really care, right? Like all you need like is a piece of paper, a pen, and coffee, right? Like Erdos had like this nice quote, right? Like that mathematicians are like machines that are transforming coffee into theorems and proofs. If you work like in robotics and reinforcement learning, or in general in machine learning, you need a little bit more than a coffee, and it's still like good to come up like with stuff at the very end, like this needs to be verified. And that's why you know, the top academic institutions, they understand this, and they are like engaged like in collaborations with industry in many different ways, by sending students for internships, by taking part in joint projects. And I think like Google again has a very unique position here, because for instance, like on the East Coast, we have lots of great academic centers, Columbia, Princeton, Harvard, MIT, and we collaborate like with all of them. We have like interest from these institutions. We have projects with those institutions. It's just like understanding. I think that working in symbiosis here, it's really the most like the best like thing like that can be done. And as I said, like academia also like understands that you know, having the potential like of really like very smart students. They also what's needed are resources, and those resources are obviously more limited, right? Like if you work at academia than if you work like in industry. So I think that getting back to your question, that we as a company are doing top research like in reinforcement learning and robotics. But as I said, like we also understand it's a very hot area. Lots of like other companies, institutions that do amazing job, and we admit it. Like so, we keep humble about
But
this.
this sounds like Oscar winners speaking from the stage. So, you know, that's like humble bragging, I think.
Yeah, maybe one
it.
day I will. I mentioned, right, like I mean, people like moving like to I mean changing, right, like completely careers. Like maybe actor is something that is waiting for me
Maybe,
in the
yeah.
future.
You can keep poker face when you speak like this. So maybe you have
Yeah.
future in the industry. Actually, I would like to add something to this. I also feel that there is this integrity problem in academia that is so individualistic and so focused on individual success, that this actually makes it hard for like building new software, right? And new like new complex algorithms on top of what is already being done, because these are complex projects and these cannot be done in isolation. So from what I know about Google and the way like Google even hires employees, is that even at the interview, you actually are encouraged to write a code that is understandable rather than a code that is the most efficient and the shortest in terms of the number of signs. So there's like a huge focus put on collaboration and on communication. And this is not true in academia. Like every PhD student starts from their own world, from their own project. And there is just so little focus put on collaboration that even if you are a part of a project, you still have to think of your own CV at the very end. So I think that doesn't really, you know, in mathematics, that might work because you only need one brain to prove a theorem. But once it comes to complex, groundbreaking projects that building new, new groundbreaking concepts in IT, then of course hundreds or thousands of people have to collaborate. So in this case, I think the Google's like workflow and the way of approaching projects just is much more functional than what we have in academia. So that's one thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that and definitely like in terms of so there is this aspect like of the teamwork, right? Like I mean, I think that the understanding that in fields like machine learning, it's really usually not the success of a one person, and because it's just the scope is like huge. So at the very end, right, like in order to be successful, like there needs to be a team of people like working on stuff. It's just like infeasible. It's not like, you know, when I work like on the Erdos-Hajnal Conjecture, sure, you know, maybe tomorrow, right? Like I will come up like with the proof or disprove it, and that would be like a, you know, a single person team, right? Like, and I will have a paper, a complete story. In machine learning, it's almost never the case. I mean, as I said, the scope is just like too large. Like there's so many things that that need to be done, like in order to verify the algorithm, like make sure that the method really works. And obviously, right, like Google and other companies, they understand this, right? Like, so it's kind of like it's important, right, like to for us, right, like to understand that it is a teamwork, and it's important to kind of I mean, people are, it's fine, right, like to have like more individual point of view, and people are just different, but at the end of the day, we are most efficient when we work together. I think like in terms of academia, it's different. Like one thing is that you know, there are lots of projects don't require like such a big scope. Lots of students working like very individual. If you work like on some like abstract stuff, even if you work on machine learning, but you are kind of like a theoretician, right? Like you are kind of proving like the properties of the algorithm. You don't necessarily need like such a big engagement. I still think that, you know, working, collaborating, even like when you're like at academia is definitely important, even if you believe that, you know, your style is kind of more individual style, because you can simply learn what others did and not repeat others' mistakes. But yeah, it's just like a little bit, you know, different flavor. I don't know, you know, whether it's necessarily like a kind of like drawback like of academia. I would say it's just academia is different, like in many ways, and you know, you can say that maybe it should be kind of like more like teamwork. On the other hand, this is like this style, right? Like that. Well, it's just historically that's kind of like how lots of like people like worked. We have like still like big projects, right? But there are definitely many kind of like very individual projects. And you know, like people like doing like also amazing stuff, like sometimes like very individual. So it's just like academia is not industry, will never be industry. Industry will never be academia. But you know, the fact that those two entities are kind of like complementing each other is actually good, like in my opinion, because like, as long as people from academia and industry can talk with each other and understand that you know, there's different strengths of different groups, and just taking the best like from each other, then this is kind of like when it works really well. And I would say that definitely that's the case like with Google collaborations, Google engagements with academia. And that's why I also enjoy so much working like at Google, because I can be still engaged like with the academia efforts, but at the same time, well, I think that I can do much more than I would be able to do like in academia if I want to make like, you know, like, I mean, breakthroughs like in machine learning, simply because like all this like other items that academia doesn't have, that we have like in industry. So it's just kind of like keeping like this balance is important. Yeah, but yeah, there are definitely like two very different entities. That's for sure.
So I guess it works well for you to keep this balance. That's
Yeah, I think like I really enjoy also having some time at Columbia University. I mean, just like, you know, the fact that I can work with students from Columbia, as I said, like, I mean, just like very fresh point of view, like where sometimes like when you don't work on a problem for years, you just like see other solutions, you see other opportunities. You simply don't know that something is impossible, right? That's what I mentioned like before, and that's actually good. One thing that, you know, I learned in my life is it's very important like to respect others' work, but you shouldn't be well. What is the word I should use? It shouldn't like make you feel that well, you simply cannot do stuff because others didn't do that, right? Like so respect to others' work. Admitting like the importance of other work is very important, but never will really think that, you know, this is like what limits you, like others didn't do that, then you won't be able to do that, because that's the right mentality. I mean, just not being scared that like these big like names didn't do certain things. That's the right mentality to actually make progress. I mean, otherwise you will always limited by what others kind of like the others would be like an upper bound for you.
right.
And I think that like working like with students, right, like they most of them, they have this like really good mentality, like where they don't really think that, they just even don't know that this problem wasn't like solved like for that many years, then just go for it, that they want to find a solution. And that's what, in my opinion, is critical in order like to have a successful career and as a researcher, and really like make a difference, like where others like did not. Always respect others' work, but never like make others like an upper bound for you, because that's never good.
Right. I also feel that there are lots of blind spots, both in science and in IT industry. I could, like, when I was building my website and I was building an aptitude test I was working on for the last 2 years, I also realized that even at WordPress, which is basically 30% of the whole pool of like worldwide websites, there are still so many missing plugins. We had to actually create a few custom plugins to be able to host this project, just because there were there was no infrastructure. And I could see how many like businesses, how many technological issues are not solved that are really basic. So the fact that Google didn't do something, that doesn't mean that, yeah, you shouldn't do it, because there are so many opportunities that are just overlooked by others, by big players, by, yeah, big companies. So I always feel that you should, if you have an intuition for a project, you should give it a go, because there is a fine chance that it was just overlooked. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, yeah, I think that the really the most important thing is it's kind of like self-confidence. What I think is kind of like critical. Hard work, but also, like as you mentioned, right? Like if you have like an idea, an exciting idea, go for it, right? Like and see how you can exercise it. And as I said, right, like so many, especially in machine learning, like there's so many people working on so many different things, right? And you would think at first glance that it's really hard to make a progress because, well, almost certainly someone else, somewhere else, it's working on a similar stuff. But it's actually not that bad. As I said, the nice thing like about like mathematics is there are so many different ways in order like to solve the problem that it's almost like impossible like for people that are like already like experts in their field to kind of like investigate all these paths. There are always like the unexplored paths, and some of them are actually lead to this like new revolutions. Mathematics is this in this way unbounded. Like, I mean, there are like will be always opportunities, just like a fresh mind. And that's actually what I say helped me a lot is the mathematical background that I got like from, I mean, times of like me like being like a student like in the high school, I mean, taking part in the competitions, then a student at the University of Warsaw, and learning mathematics and understanding the beauty of mathematics and the power of mathematics. That's something that like helps like all the time, because as I said, like it's impossible like for an individual entity to just kind of like go like deep enough like into mathematics, explore like all the feasible paths. And as long as you have like fresh mind and you are excited like about mathematics, there is a huge opportunity for progress always. So that's kind of like my advice like to everyone. Don't be like kind of like overwhelmed by what others did. Think about like the what you can do, and yeah, I mean, I'm like my opinion is that mathematical background like helps a lot. It doesn't really matter whether you end up like being like a particle physicist, or you work in IT, or you work as a professor at academia. The mathematical background like is the core building block of your success, especially like in machine learning, where right now we just rediscover mathematics in so many different ways by just like applying it like differently, like fields that you wouldn't think about applying like graph theory into robotics like some number of years ago, and we do it right now. So it's that's what I kind of like I'm happy about, that like very early on I kind of I fell in love into mathematics, and it stays with me for my entire life.
Well, not without a reason. It's called Queen of Sciences, right?
Right.
Actually, I'm still tempted to ask you one question. I know that we are tight with time, but if I still have a minute, I'm
Sure.
very intrigued by this concept of lifelong learning. Since you, among your like numerous interests, you mentioned that what also interests you is applying robotics to lifelong learning. So I'm intrigued what that means and how this can be achieved.
So, one way of thinking about reinforcement learning is so you have an agent or a robot that wants to achieve a particular task, and you try to train a policy. A policy for the robot or an agent like would be, well, a recipe in any given state what the action should be taken. And usually those actions are very reactive. So what you basically react to is a current state that that you are at in the particular moment, but not so much what happened like before, like many steps like before when you actually ended up in that particular state. So the idea of lifelong learning is, well, to make really robots think, right, like a little bit more like humans. Like when we try to accomplish certain tasks, there are lots of tasks where we can be purely reactive, where whatever like we will do like is really determined by the current state. But the most like challenging tasks will require like in particular memorization, require us like to exercise the experience that we got potentially many years ago. And that is still like very challenging like in robotics, because it's a big question how you can leverage memory, how to what memory is, how our memory works, right? Like how we can actually extract, right, like from our brain, like these like skills that are most relevant or seem to be most relevant, like to solve a particular task. How we can get back, right, like to things that we learned like long time ago to use it, right, like in the particular situation. So the idea of lifelong learning is to make sure that robots can leverage those skills. They can learn from the experience, like not just like short term, but long term, and can use those learned skills not necessarily right now, but later on, and efficiently find it, right, and use that memory and solve this task. So this in order to do that, you also need to like learn like all the time. So that's kind of like roughly speaking, what this term means. And it's very challenging because it really touches like these fundamental questions about like how our brains work, and we still don't have answers to most of them. I mean, we would say that human brain is still like mostly a mystery, like why this is the case that like we operate like in such an efficient way. I have a 1-year-old daughter, and I see every day how she learns new stuff, and she can generalize from just like a couple of examples. Machine learning algorithms needs millions like of examples. The models like need to be trained on huge amount of data in order like to get good quality. So so she can like operate like in this very heterogeneous environment when most of the things she sees like the first time, and she can do it efficiently, and she stores those memories. She can kind of leverage like efficiently, and she trains like her brain pretty much like nonstop, like from all these experiences, from negative examples, like from positive examples. So if you think about it, right, like it's very efficient like agent, reinforcement learning agent, like operating in a completely new environment. The holy grail of people working in robotics is to somehow emulate the way how robots can be trained. But of course, right, like it's a big team, and nobody really knows right now how to do it efficiently. We are still like in a very preliminary phase. It might be the case that it will require completely rethinking the way how we do machine learning, right? Like there are experts saying that the way how we train these big neural network models right now is simply wrong, because we cannot generalize so easily. We need like massive amount of examples. It might be the case that it will require like some revolution in machine learning, but that will also like imply well, I mean, big revolution in robotics. So this lifelong learning, it's really like an idea that we should rethink the way how we train these agents, because that's how we as humans are operating in this complicated world.
Right. Perfect answer. Thank you so much for this. Okay, like we have to finish right now, but like if you could in one sentence say something to all these young people who would like to become Googlers one day.
Well, what I can say is just do what you are passionate about. Then definitely, if you are like interested in companies like Google, there are so many research teams working on so many different things that you will almost certainly find like a topic that works for you. I would say, if my one advice, if you want to be successful and or even like think about like you have a very particular plan, don't actually think too much about it, right? Like that's kind of my experience. I didn't really think about joining Google. At some point, I got a call, and it all started like with the internship. Be focus on your passion. Focus on the stuff you are good at, and the other things will just naturally come. Don't overthink. Don't think too much about your career. You have like a really good career at the end if you are passionate like about the subject, and that's really critical, because you can be like in a great company, you can be working with great people, but if you don't have fun for what you are working on, it wouldn't make sense. On the other hand, if you have fun, despite like all the difficulties that you will have, because each of us like will have like in your life, that will be that will be always a driving force. So maybe it's not the most like satisfactory answer, but I would say like you want to think about career at Google like or other companies. Actually, don't actually think about it too much. Like focus on your passion, and things will go naturally. That's my advice.
Perfect. Well, sounds convincing to me. I also I fully agree. I mean, ever since I focused on my passion, I feel much happier, and I feel like I'm going the right direction. So I couldn't agree more. And thank you so much, Krzysztof, for being with us today. Thank you so much for your deep insights, and I wish you all the very best. I hope to hear more about your career in the future. I will be tracking your success on LinkedIn, on other media, and I hope to see more of your fantastic achievements. And yeah, thank you so much once again, and for being here today. And if you guys who are watching this episode would like to ask Krzysztof any questions, I think you can reach out to him through LinkedIn. That's probably the best way. And of course, if you would like to get more of this type of content, then please subscribe to the channel, and see you next time.
Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure, and talk to you soon.